This conference will now be recorded.
Conference is now being recorded, so I will once again call the meeting to order and welcome you. Hopefully we can get through our business quickly and efficiently. The one additional item that needs to go on the agenda that was not previously distributed, and that is to identify who will be convening this committee going forward. My term on the Ashland Town Council is up at the end of June. I did not run for re-election, so I will be stepping down from the Planning Commission at the end of June as well. So everybody who wants to volunteer to take over, please raise your hands. Let's move forward. If we could ask Martha to read the statement about a remote meeting so that we can then be official.
Sure. I have a draft up on the screen just so that those of you who want to can follow along. Here it goes. Since the governor declared the state of emergency on March 12, 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, state and local government bodies have been providing for the continuity of government by meeting remotely or telephonic or electronic means in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Commonwealth's emergency and other applicable laws, guidance provided by the Attorney General and their respective legal counsel. On April 22nd, the General Assembly approved a budget amendment to authorize all public bodies, including regional bodies such as Plan RVA, likewise to meet by electronic means without a physical quorum assembled together during a governor-declared state of emergency, as long as certain conditions are met so as to provide for the continuity of governmental operations. This new authority became effective immediately upon passage. The 2020 COVID-19 virus makes it impractical and unsafe, even potentially life-threatening, for a quorum of this body to physically assemble in one location pursuant to Virginia code. Further, the virus makes it impractical and unsafe for the public and the agency staff to gather in the same location to participate in this meeting. Health, safety, and welfare of our community is of paramount importance. Therefore, we have determined the appropriateness and eligibility to conduct today's meeting electronically pursuant to the provisions of Virginia Code and related legislation approved by the General Assembly of Virginia in light of the Governor's emergency declaration for COVID-19. The convening of this body has been determined necessary in order to continue necessary business of the organization. The matters included on the agenda address important and essential matters of continuing the work of government, and therefore it is appropriate to convene during this time. While we do not know the exact duration of the current practice of electronic meetings, we will continue to function in this manner until such time as it is deemed advisable to return to in-person meetings. At this time, we expect meetings to occur in electronic format through the current declaration, which was extended this week by the governor beyond June 10th, 2020. Plan RVA staff has provided notice of this meeting by which we are virtually gathered to members of the public. Notice was provided last week on Friday. Am I right about that? It's last week through posting on the Plan RVA website and distribution of email notification to members, alternates, and known interested parties, including the media. In order to comply with the provisions of Virginia law and to improve accessibility to the discussions intended for today, this meeting will be recorded. Audio and visual recordings of the meeting will be posted on the Plan RVA website within 48 hours of this meeting. Any members of the public wishing to address the Audit, Facilities, and Finance Committee of Plan RVA were invited to submit comments via email. None have been received, but anyone that's participating as an observer during the meeting today may also submit comments or questions at any time via email at planrva@planrva.org or by using the online chat functions of the meeting platform. Those individuals who are observing by phone may be called upon to address the committee with their questions or comments. All comments and questions submitted during the meeting will be reviewed following the meeting, and to the extent practical, responses provided are posted on the Plan RVA website. We ask that everyone identify themselves first when speaking so that we may more accurately record the activities of the meeting. All lines have been muted by the administrator to minimize additional noise and feedback. You may unmute your line at any time to request acknowledgement from the chair. Those who have signed into the online platform may request acknowledgement by chatting if you wish to use that feature. Staff will be monitoring the chat and raise hand functions through the meeting to assure we do not overlook anyone wishing to participate. I'll now ask our clerk, Ms. Fusco, to certify we have followed the approved procedures for appropriate notice of this meetings and the meeting by which we are convening.
Yes, we have.
Thank you. Now she will call the roll, and so if everyone on the call could indicate your presence by saying aye when your name is called. Anyone who wishes to identify themselves following the roll call will be invited to do so.
Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Gray, Mr. Holland,
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon,
Here.
Ms. Page,
Aye.
Dr. Spagna.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we
We're
have
ready
a
to-
quorum.
We do, yes. We're ready to move on. The first item on the agenda is the meeting notes from April 29th. Just something to highlight for you. Diane did a great job of doing kind of above and beyond, but with this new virtual format, we have some new capability. So I wanted to point your attention to the link that's included in the website, or sorry, that's included in the meeting notes. There's a link here will take you to the YouTube site where the actual audio and visual recording of last meeting can be found. Members of the public can access that. And then we have the notes of the discussion and action items taken during the meeting included in your packet. So whenever you're ready, if there's any discussion or when you're ready for action, we would be looking for a motion to accept the minutes as submitted. And that will require a roll call vote.
I make an awful motion, Mr. Chairman, that the minutes be accepted as printed. There are no corrections.
Okay, I
Second.
hear a motion from Mr. Holland. Who was the second, please?
Pat O'Bannon.
Thank you.
All
We
right,
have a
Mr.
motion and a
Chairman,
second.
this is Canova Peterson. I don't think I indicated I was here when you were doing the original roll call. Did you call my name?
I'm sorry. I think I missed calling your name, Mr. Peterson. I will
I'm here.
make note of that. Thank you.
Okay.
And Diane, I think Mrs. Gray might be back on the line now, or it might be Mrs. Page, but we have another caller that came back on, so.
Yeah, we have Ms. Page is calling in and we have a caller number 3.
Who is caller number 3?
I noticed we lost Miss Gray, so it might be that she is called back in on that line.
Okay.
It's Kim Gray. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was still muted. I've been talking the whole time.
That's okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the minutes as presented. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, I'll ask Ms. Fusco to call the roll.
Okay. Ms. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Holland,
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon,
Aye.
Ms. Page,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Dr. Spagna.
Aye.
Thank you.
So the minutes are approved. I met earlier in this week via this platform with the staff to go over both this agenda and take a first look at the financial statements and the proposed budgets. I'm going to ask Ms. Eckhout to present the details. My sense from looking at them just the other day was that we finished the month in good financial condition, continuing to make progress towards our goal of the $1 million reserve fund. So Terry, could you take it away for details?
Looking at page 6, the net income for the month of April was $37,278, which resulted in continuing with the favorable variance year to date. We are ahead of net income projected for the year. On page 7, we see that the fund balance continues to rise, and the projected April 30th unrestricted reserve is $1,023,370.
Yay. This is Jim.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
this is O'Bannon, and if I may say, the reserve was intended to be there for an emergency situation that we may have coming up. So I'm very pleased to see that it's over $1 million. You may need to use that in the next few months if the economy is the way it's going. That was one of the reasons for doing that, obviously, that we talked about at the beginning. So hang in there and we'll try to keep it positive, but that's why that's there. Okay. You don't want to use it unless it's an emergency. Okay.
now
We will be
looking
getting,
at, I'm sorry.
yeah, we will be getting into the proposed budget for next year when we finish looking at the April financial statements. But I think you'll see that Martha and the staff have crafted a budget going forward that keeps us in a sound financial position. Terry,
So
can
as we move on and we look at the salaries, monthly actual to the monthly budget, we did come in at 72% reimbursement for the month of April, which is considerably higher than our average delta for the rest of the year. And we can, basically attribute that to staff not taking time off due to COVID. Martha, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a higher figure than we would normally see, but just as Terry said, it's largely because we don't have holidays during this particular month, and we didn't have, the normal leave, and just staff members as we near the end of the year really focusing time in those billable programs. The remaining time outside of 72% would be what you would expect. Diane, myself, Terry, working on the administrative parts of the agency where we don't typically spend more than a small amount of time in grant-funded programs.
And so this is Patricia. I have a question.
please.
Not really budget related, but budget related. So I realize that a lot of people have not taken their vacation time off due to COVID. Is this something that will be carried over to another year, or how is this planned, or will they be able to take their vacation time?
Our vacation leave expires at the end of the calendar year. So any staff member that may have had time scheduled to be out of the office on leave or vacation, we had some staff members that actually had some scheduled sick leave due to medical related activities. They are not at risk of losing that leave. So from an employee standpoint, while it's been an inconvenience and probably a bit of a stressor for them, it's not affecting them that they'll lose their leave. I would say for the agency, it does have a significant impact to us as it increases our leave liability. And so later in today's discussion, I think we'll talk a little bit about some ideas that Terry has proposed for how we might be able to mitigate that. But at this point in time, anyone who had scheduled leave has not been able to take it will be able to reschedule that according to the COVID and restrictions and as they lift and those kinds of things. So.
Okay, thank you.
Martha, I'd like to suggest that due to these special circumstances and the staff members that they may have a need to carry over more than 2 years of what they're, permitted, with their monthly accumulation and carry the maximum for their vacation leave. Mm-hmm. I think that we could create a form where they would make the ask for the approval to waive this deadline with your written approval.
So I think you're absolutely right. And I think we would need to request the executive committee at minimum to authorize me to do that. We've been in that situation before where staff members, sort of due to unforeseen circumstances, were at risk of losing at the December 31 timeframe. And our legal counsel cautioned against me administratively approving those for fear that it could be considered a discriminatory or some sort of favoritism. So I do think it would be very appropriate, though, for the executive committee to consider a suspension of that particular requirement in the policy, given the circumstances. And we could look at that over the next month or two and bring something back both to this committee and the executive committee to consider, so that staff members are not at risk when it comes around to December again. It's a great point.
And I agree it should go to the executive committee.
Okay.
Keeps everything above board and transparent.
We can add that to the to-do list.
Thank you.
Terry, do you want me to move to the next page?
Please.
Okay. Here?
Yes. So again, for April, it was a very good month. Net income was $37,278, resulting in a favorable budget variance of $31,002. There were laptops purchased under the capital expense project line in the amount of $12,165. We did receive permission from VDOT to have that equipment reimbursed. The program expenditures ran $72,000 higher than budget, and our expenditures were under budget. Again, salaries came in below budget for $7,753. Are there any questions?
I just note that the laptop purchase was to facilitate staff being able to work from home.
Very good.
Yes, thank you. And was reimbursed at 80%. So it was a really good deal on our agency behalf.
I'm sorry, Martha, it was 90% reimbursed.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Better
Thank
still.
you. Yeah. I don't know why I always do that. The rest of the financial statements are the detail of what Terry has gone over in the first few pages. We can certainly go and dig into more as anybody might want. But again, I'll just pause on this second sheet of the balance sheet for April. This is a monthly snapshot, so it's not the official, but again, we have far exceeded the target as far as recuperating the fund balance goal of $1 million and are currently in excess of that.
Which is good news.
Let me
When you're
echo,
ready-
it's great news.
Thank you. So when you're ready, we would be looking for yet another roll call vote. The request from staff would be to advance these financial statements with recommendation for acceptance at the June 11th commission meeting.
If there are no other questions, is there a motion to that effect?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
With a note to the commission about the goal achieved, I think highlighted, if that's possible, Terry, Martha.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Pat O'Bannon, second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Could we please call the roll?
Miss Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Holland,
Aye.
Miss O'Bannon,
Aye.
Miss Page,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Dr. Spagna.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to the executive committee and to the whole board to be for their questions, and with the note to highlight the fact that we have hit the goal of $1 million.
Great.
Okay, moving on, I believe Ms. Heater is going to present the proposed budget.
Yes, and so I've sent to both Ms. Gray and Mrs. Page, and we'll forward out this spreadsheet or PowerPoint document to everybody following the end of the meeting. But I did want to put together a couple charts and some things like that that sort of hopefully help to bring the budget documents to life a little bit. But if you're following along with your packet, either on your computer or in hard copy, I'm on page 17 right now of that packet. And this is a look at just the revenues that we project for the upcoming fiscal year by the rows are by program area with the specific projects or more detailed information within each of the 7 program areas for the agency. And then the columns are the actual source of funding, whether it be federal, state awards, federal or state grant awards, the General Assembly appropriations, the various types of local member contributions, and then finally private on the other side. I'm going to switch my screen right now, and I'll try to narrate as much as possible this information as well for those of you that can't see the screen. But just wanted to share with you a little bit of background or backdrop of that data. As you saw on that chart, the table represents the federal and state grant awards. As I said, state funding through the general appropriations, local member dues, and it does include something a little bit new this year, which is the deferred revenue. You've seen that in the financial statements, but 2 years ago now, we received funding through the Capital Region Collaborative, and those dollars were left unspent in prior fiscal years, and so they've just been sitting essentially as deferred revenue, and so we are looking to program those dollars in the upcoming fiscal year for 21. Most of the funds that we have in this upcoming budget are confirmed. However, there are a few exceptions. You'll see in the detailed budget and for revenue and expenses, there are some items in the note section where it indicates that this is where it might be carryover dollars. Those numbers will be firmed up from estimates to actual following the close of June 30th. So we know exactly what the dollar amounts are that carry over from the current to the future fiscal year. Additionally, we have a number of grant applications that are pending right now. And so those are also noted in the budget in the revenue section where we have applications. I would tell you that from a percent confidence perspective, I'm 90+% confident in those dollar amounts. Several of those pending grant applications are annual renewals where we are either, for lack of a better word, the application is a formality, or where we've been actually invited to submit a proposal for funding that has been verbally committed to us. The one remaining grant application that is pending is our hazard mitigation plan update. And again, that falls in that category where we've received the verbal notification of award, but we have not yet received the piece of paper in hand. Our understanding is that that has been delayed due to the FEMA and Department of Emergency Management focused on COVID right now, but we do expect that award to come. So,
Martha, may I?
Yes, ma'am.
Please be very careful in your budgeting, because over the course of the next year, you touched on it, but over the course of the next year, we can't really be guaranteed anything. I mean, we have to be very, very careful. Right now, the federal government is totally overextended, and either the state government's going to have to make up for some of those funds with some funds, but you know, and even every county, as you know, is being very, very frugal. So just be very, very cautious. I know you said that it's somewhat of a formality, but I fear that some of these funds, they may put them off, or we just have to be very, very conservative, for a better word.
Absolutely.
We are seeing a tremendous downturn in the economy, and I anticipate, and I think every other member here who's in local government is realizing that the businesses are closing, restaurants are closing, the money isn't coming in, you know. So just an FYI, I know we will probably do something with hazard mitigation and emergency planning. That's probably the key right now, because if we have the COVID-19 and we're slapped with a hurricane or something, I mean, those kind of plans are what our local governments are going to need. So I'm hoping that those funds will come through, but just be very, very cautious. I keep telling every organization I'm in, they're just bopping along like we're going to just come right back, but just be very cautious. And I know you're setting a positive note, but maybe I'm not as positive. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, Martha, I'd like to add, you know, some of the conversations that we've touched on, Martha, and where we want to look very carefully at the budget, and we may come back and request a de-appropriation of funds as we know, as the information does come forward and we know more about the circumstances.
And that's a good approach. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I'll add, we right now, sort of to your point, we would traditionally, under the normal way that we budget, we would traditionally be looking at a revenue total of about $4 million, just over $4 million. It's written there in the notes at $4,053,717. We're actually scaling that back kind of to the points that you're making, Mrs. O'Bannon, about what's actually looking realistic. And then, like Terry said, I think we expect that we'll be coming back to you over the course of the year because there are so many unknowns right now to be able to, pull this into evolving realities. The documents that you have in the packet show the revenue anyway by two kind of looks, I'll say. That first page is a look at the revenue by funding source, as I mentioned. That corresponds to our audit and reporting requirements. As you know, in our audit, we have to include the schedule of federal expenditures. And so this helps kind of keep clear about where our money is coming from, which I think is also helpful. And then we also provide it by program area so that you can see how the dollars from federal, state, local, private are being allocated to program areas as well. I think this really becomes important when we think about our strategic plan and how the budget aligns and supports that, making sure that we don't get out of whack with what we're supposed to be doing. So from a general principle perspective, our approach this year.
I have a question,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman. I know there was some discussion about the per capita local member dues.
Oh, yes.
I
skipped right over that. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry.
Talk about that for a minute, because I know there was some discussion about reducing that or.
Yes, okay. I am so sorry. I completely skipped over that on the previous slide. We did anticipate a 5-cent reduction in the local member dues in this budget. So one of the things that we talked about with Dr. Spagna is following today's committee meeting, I would like to communicate with the local government administrators that it is our doing our part, as I say, to be able to recognize the constraints that the local governments are operating in as they look to the new fiscal year. So I know several of the jurisdictions have gone through the budget process already, and I believe some of the localities have, through informal conversation, communicated that the 5-cent reduction would be very helpful this coming year. We'd like to send something formal out to everyone, though, to let them know that this is how we're approaching the budget for June 11th. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that.
What is it currently? And you said it's being reduced by 5 cents.
Oh, thank you. Right now, our local member dues per capita assessment is 55 cents per capita. And we have included figures here that are based on 50 cents per capita. So it's a 10% reduction or 5 cents. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. I also would say that while we've been in conversation with some of the jurisdictions about what the Central Virginia Transportation Authority will look like in the coming fiscal year, we also did not include any funding that might be passed through our agency in conjunction with prioritization or anything like that, again, to be as conservative as possible. So, that is not factored into our budget at all. So moving on, this is just a graph that I've put together that shows you kind of a look back. I think you all have asked in previous meetings to have a little bit of points of comparison to prior years. We're now at the point where we do have about 3 years of data that are comparable enough, I think, to feel confident that when we put together charts like this, it's comparing useful information. So overall, I just kind of wanted to point out a couple of things. Mrs. O'Bannon touched on this. As an agency, we are heavily reliant on federal funding. As you can see, federal funding since FY18 has been the biggest area of increase. And so what you might not realize, though, is that those increases are largely attributable to our emergency management and environmental program funding. Transportation does continue to rise, but not as significant of a pace. Part of that's because our transportation funding is so significant to begin with. It would take a lot for us to have the same kind of percent increases year over year as we do in our smaller programs. State funding increases are tracking mostly with the MPO dollars, and so there's a match that the state provides each time the federal dollars go up. So that's really why you're seeing that uptick in the yellow bar there for state funding. The blue funding, as you can see, is relatively stable. That's in part because in FY18 we were receiving Capital Region Collaborative funding. When we get to FY20 and FY21, we're not receiving those dollars. So that's why it looks relatively flat, even though the population in the jurisdictions does go up, which increases our local government contributions each year. And then federal funding, as you can imagine, for us, that sort of bounces around year to year. We're a little bit down in FY21 relative to 20 and 19. We had no private funding in FY18. So I continue to sort of look at alternatives, but you know, the way that our programs function at this point in time, we are heavily reliant on federal funding. Any questions about this slide? Okay. I'll switch to a look at our funding by program area. So this is how in our current budget, and this is just a graphical display of what you have in that table, showing our dollars that we expect to receive in revenue allocated by program. As you know, and as you can see, the lion's share of our funding is dedicated to transportation. That's our urban and rural transportation programs. But over the last couple of years, our environmental and emergency management programs have grown significantly. I will say that the majority of the $500,000 expected for emergency management are pass-through dollars. Those aren't dollars that our agency uses internal to our operations. So I'll also kind of point out just another bit that I'm kind of proud of. We've definitely streamlined our activities that go to support what I would call like agency administration or management. A couple of years ago, we were probably pushing about 50% of our expenditures in the administration category. Part of that is I would say, real improvements to how our agency is operating, and part of it is better tracking of information. So we've been much more intentional over the last 2 years to program dollars in community development, which is the category that we use to support our local technical assistance and kind of program development activities. We've also been much more intentional in the last year in thinking about ways that we could use our dollars toward data research and data analysis, largely informed by the strategic planning process. So when I put this chart together, one thing that I wanted to make sure that it's important to note that very little of our funding is actually what I'll say is totally discretionary. The majority of our funding is awarded for a specific purpose. We could never use transportation funding for emergency management, for example. And so I wanted to take a look at 2 sort of more detailed slides to really look at our, what I would call, totally discretionary dollars. And so, as I said, the majority of our funds are dedicated to a specific purpose. We can define the work within those programs, but we can't shift from one program area to another with most of our funds. The exceptions to that are the dollars that we receive from the General Assembly through their annual appropriation process or biannual appropriation process, and then the local membership dues. So I'm going to walk you through how those dollars are allocated. And again, these numbers are reflected in the table that are on in your packet. So about 91% of the General Assembly dues are proposed to be programmed to data research and analysis this coming year. Again, aligning with our strategic planning framework, where that's really a growth opportunity for us and a way to be able to continue to add value to our local government jurisdictions. And it aligns well with our work efforts underway with transportation, with the long-range transportation plan, SE data, current and future land use analysis, all of those things that you're familiar with. The 9% remaining is categorized as strategic partnerships. It's in support of our regional plan. That is a requirement that the Planning District Commission report each year to the General Assembly the status of a regional plan effort. And so that for us is the compilation of our transportation plan, our hazard mitigation plan, our economic development strategy, the work that has been enlivened through the Capital Region Collaborative, any of the sub-mode plans that we have. And so we use those to be able to develop what I'll call like a compendium of those plans, and we report to the General Assembly each year on the status of that. On the local member dues side, we have those dollars allocated a little bit more broadly across our program areas. First and foremost, we program our local member dues to meet match obligations. So similar to how local and state government works, we try to maximize our federal dollars. And so we first apply our local member dues to the transportation program. So our match obligation in any given transportation program year is about $230,000. And so we, of course, use all of the TPO special assessment and then the remaining $178,000 of local due of funding from our local member dues go to support the match requirement for the transportation program area. Next, we use our local government dues to match our environmental planning program dollars. And so that's another $93,000 that go to match those grants. And that's a mix anywhere of 50% match, so every dollar we put in, the state gives us $1, versus some that have a much smaller match obligation and some that have a little bit of a larger. And then we match our emergency management program as well. The remaining categories, agency management, community development, and data and research, those are three program areas that do not receive grant funding at all to support them. And so the local member dues kind of fill in where we need that to be able to support those activities. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of how the dollars get allocated by program area. When you're ready, I'll skip over to expenses. Any questions? Okay. So on the expense side, largely I would say we're expecting relative stability in the upcoming fiscal year. As Terry mentioned, I think if anything, there might be some areas where we could realize some savings. Certainly, easy things come to mind. We've already seen a significant reduction in our expenses related to staff consumption in the office because we haven't been there, but also mileage reimbursement has virtually zeroed out. And I would expect that depending on how long restrictions and just practices in general around in-region travel and certainly out-of-region travel, we will be making some significant changes in the coming fiscal year relative to those things. So I would say you all are aware that I've had conversations with you and the executive committee about under normal circumstances, we would have liked to have worked to increase our staff capacity in the coming fiscal year. We realize that the times don't necessarily support that. And so while the dollars might indicate that we can afford it, I'll get to this later, but we're proposing sort of a delayed schedule for looking at increased staff capacity. I think the budget also does include continued investment in technology. The switch to virtual has been both an opportunity and a challenge for us. And so we have been very careful that the purchases that we've made over the last couple of months in moving to a virtual setting would be useful to us when we do return to the office and return to kind of a more normal state of operation. So I think we've pretty much met all of our needs with technology, but want to continue to make sure that we have the resources there to do that. And then I think the third thing that I would expect to be an issue for us in the coming year as far as expenses is just general office space improvements. Just like your jurisdictions, we're going to need to make some different arrangements with regard to the layout and utilization of our space. So off the top of my head, examples would include potential partitioning in some of the areas where we have staff members sitting perhaps a little bit too close together and or in shared workspaces. We want to spread the staff members out. We'll be reclaiming some of our meeting rooms as office rooms with the idea that we won't be having meetings as much in our office, at least for the near term, and so staff members can spread out that way. I would say we're also contemplating some additional changes. We'll either need to deal with elimination of community kitchenware, or we need to look at better ways to sanitize and clean. We do not have a dishwasher in our kitchen right now, and I think if we're going to continue to provide dishes and flatware and cups and things like that, we're going to need to provide better sanitization for our staff members. So those are just a couple of examples. I don't think it's terribly significant, especially relative to what your jurisdictions have had to undertake to prepare for people returning to work, but there will be some expense related to that. We've also been talking a little bit more about how we think about our new office space as we come to the expiration of our current lease agreement, and what this information about COVID and site space planning and that kind of thing would mean for us in future things. So I'll say two things about that right now. One, I know that it's been on the table with this committee a couple of times where we want to sort of leave all options on the table. You've talked before about the possibility of maybe realizing savings in our leasing costs by not having such a big boardroom. And I think it's possible that we might look at more of a rotational model or an off-site location for meetings and that kind of thing. One that would allow us to provide probably some better physical distancing in meetings, but it also might be a real cost savings to us. So I'd like to, and have included in the budget, allocation of about $5,000 to ask our space assistant providers to do a little bit more in-depth work with us to look at space needs assessment. Originally, we had not anticipated that we would fund any of that activity, that we would as much as possible have any expenses related to new office space planning be covered by our prospective landlord. But I would like to ask the committee to consider support of investment in that area, just so that we can kind of get it right with our new lease agreement. So I'll pause there for a second and just kind of get your reaction to those things.
Questions, comments?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is Jim Holland speaking. I would like to support that. I think you're right on track, Margaret. I appreciate that. Thank you for the foresight.
Martha, when is the lease up? I mean, when is it? Isn't it 2022 or 2023?
Yes.
22?
2022, yes. Yeah.
Well, this crisis is going to probably be with us at least a year. So you're thinking in terms of finding a location maybe in the city or one of the counties, like a big auditorium where we can meet and be at least 6 seats apart or something like that? Is that what you're thinking? Then you could use this space with petitions or something like that for the employees?
I think that that's a possibility. I mean, certainly if we, right now, well, I'll say in a normal TPO or Planning District Commission meeting, we average between 40 and 50 attendees when you count all of the members plus staff plus, especially at the TPO meetings, the sort of stakeholders. It's hard to say whether that many people will continue to attend those meetings as spectators, but and a lot of this, I think, will be dictated by individual levels of comfort. But I would say right now, we do not have the space in our boardroom to let people spread out the way that they might like to, particularly around your boardroom table. And so,
if I can mention something, one of the things that in Henrico, as you know, we video stream live. And I'm sure, I think Chesterfield does, don't they, Mr. Holland? I think they do. I know the city goes through public broadcasting, but we do it in our own control booth. If you do that, one of the things we've started doing, because there's no one in the boardroom, is we give them an address where they can type in, they can email in questions in order to participate. I just had a town meeting yesterday where we video stream live and we take questions live. So in other words, you wouldn't have to buy any extra equipment. You could use either what, say, Henrico uses or maybe Chesterfield, because there's no extra charge. And that makes sense. And you could have them in the auditorium. Certainly the auditorium seats like 300 or 400, some might like 375. So you could put everybody in there. The emergency order does not limit us to 10. That's the other thing. I know there was some discussion with the attorneys on that, but you got to have a big auditorium. You're right. We couldn't really do it in the room that you have there. But I don't see finding a new, renting a new location
Oh, I apologize. No, I
I know what you
exactly
were
what
saying.
you were saying. Yeah,
Talking, using
we
it
think
as,
we can, yeah, we think we can use other space, ideally at no cost. We've talked to the Jack Berry at the convention center about what that could look like. There, we would have to absorb the technology costs because they have a third-party provider. But in county-owned facilities, I've already been actually in contact with the folks at Libby Mill Library as a possibility of a location for meetings. And so, yes, exactly what you're saying. If we could transition meetings to an offsite location, we would not have to host them in our office and make those more costly improvements.
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I think this makes good sense while we're dealing with COVID-19. Fortunately, COVID-19 is not going to be here forever. And if we're looking at space planning, I think it's very important that our meeting space be in the same place that our offices are. There's too many times when we need information that is not in that meeting room that we can get right now because we're in the same location when we're meeting there. So I don't think we would want to get to a permanent situation of having our meetings elsewhere than where the offices are. Obviously, under COVID-19 restrictions, we have to do things differently under the emergency plan. But when it comes to the space planning for our future, I don't think we'd plan that around COVID-19. We plan it around the office needs.
Yes, I think you're right. We have short-term and long-term decisions, and they are going to be two very different scenarios, I think.
And if I can, one of the things you could do if we have it at a remote location, if it, let's say Terry can't be there, she could be in there the way she is now virtually. Yes. And if you had a question that she needed to answer, she could either be in the room or virtually. And we've done this with the Airport Commission several times now. I know Mr. Holland has participated in those. And we have some people in the room and some people virtual. And that's fine too. If you want to have the meeting in the room and people feel uncomfortable, they can be there virtually. But you have the technology. See, that was the other thing. You have to have cameras and some other things that, I don't want to see us have to purchase electronics and equipment that you're not going to be able to use or really won't need in the near future. That's what Mr. Peterson, I think, is getting at. I really think that's the bottom line. So, okay.
So Martha, when we circle back around and we're talking about the $5,000 for space planning needs, we're kind of talking about the layout in our current space.
The $5,000 for space planning would be for whether it's a reconfiguration of our new space beyond our current lease expiration or new space. And so that's what that $5,000 would be for, specific to our lease expiration, not in response to COVID,
right,
but long-term space needs.
Mm-hmm.
I support that planning.
Okay, great. So it's included in this budget. I can point out that line item when we get to that part. So from a principal perspective, one of the things that we've really tried to make sure of in the last couple years, but certainly in this year, is to maximize the reimbursement of our indirect costs. For us, that means that we have to be very intentional about making sure that staff time is spent in reimbursable programs. So again, it's just, it's nothing new, but it's just a very guiding principle for us. Terry's done also a really good job of making some recommendations for adding some lines in our budget document that I would say they're not necessarily surprises, but they're those year-end adjusting entries that we don't account for on the front end. So examples of that, last year we started budgeting for leave balance payouts. So there's a $10,000 placeholder in our budget for anyone who might separate from the agency if we need to pay, for retirees, sick leave. I think it's a cap of $3,000, or for anybody who has accumulated compensatory time or vacation time. Similarly, I think we've gotten over the hump as far as technology and that kind of thing, but we definitely want to make sure that we don't have any sort of surprises again with technology. And then Terry's added a new line in the expense categories of depreciation. That is a line item that we've never budgeted for before, but that's always been a year-end adjusting entry. And so she's got a placeholder there for that as well, which I think all of these are kind of affirmative steps to get a clearer and clearer picture of what we expect to see by the end of the year. Finally, we've added a line item below the calculation of the net operating income or loss for the year. And this is a management goal. I know that this is above and beyond the policies that the board and the committee have established, but my goal would be to each year, to Mrs. O'Bannon's point, plan to transfer 5% of local member dues back to the fund balance and just build that into our practices so that if there is a year where we encounter some sort of a financial difficulty, we're continuing to intentionally build up that rainy day fund to be able to deal with those kinds of emergencies. So to give you a little bit of some background on expenses, again, I put together some charts that show expenses and how they connect how they compare year over year. So the blue bar, if you're looking at the screen, represents salary and wages and also training and professional development. So you can see between fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 21, not a huge difference there, especially when you do a year over year comparison. The delta between fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 21 represents about an 8% growth rate. And so largely we've been able to achieve that relative stability due to our reorganization, making sure that when we recruit staff members, they're going to be working in programs that are reimbursable. We have been able to absorb thus far our pretty generous health insurance package. I think that needs to be on the agenda this year to evaluate whether our offerings are still competitive, appropriate, in line with what we need to do from a financial management perspective. And we've been able to, I think, continue to support our staff members' professional development, which is something that they've indicated time and again that that's important to them. The use of our expenses related to professional fees has actually declined since FY18. We have used contractors and other professional services for our operating support. The bumps really are around the website development, some of our technology needs, the professional services with financial management that we have with Warren Whitney. So this fiscal year, those expenses are continuing to be on a decline from prior years, which I think is a good thing and is something that you as committee members and board members have expressed an interest in seeing. Office expenses are also just, I think, relatively increasing. They're, I think, more kind of just tracking with overall cost of increasing business and that kind of thing. So I think, when we look at things year over year, we're not seeing an alarming increase there. I will say the yellow, the fourth bar in program expenses, this is where we're seeing a very significant increase relative to expenses. And largely that's because we had a very significant increase in pass-through funding. So these are grants that we receive from a state or federal agency that we use not for operating, but to be able to either purchase goods or services on behalf of our member jurisdictions. So when I extract those dollars, our program expenses are not experience a significant increase at all. And so let's see, I have to move my notes a little bit. So on the next slide, I have the same data showed just a slightly different way. It just stacks it. So depending on how you like to look at information, it shows you sort of the way that the colors look to each other. This line is the representation of the pass-through expenses that are part of our budget. So as you can see, a pretty significant increase from FY18 to FY21, and that's what represents that very large increase in the yellow section of each of the bars. So I'm going to skip sort of in the interest of time to kind of the bottom line here. Based on that forecast of revenues, again, we have we have accounted for about more than $4 million. We've ratcheted that down to just under $4 million based on what we can program staff time to be able to realize in the coming fiscal year. I've broken that down by federal, state, local, and private. From an expense perspective, we've got total expenses of $3.7 million. Again, a large portion of that being our program expenses pass-through. About $1 million are set aside for pass-through. $500,000 of that are with the anticipated RSTP and CMAQ to invest in the transportation demand model. So you can dig into that if you like. But we're looking at, from an operating perspective, a net ordinary income next year of $175,000. Then when we factor in those adjustments that Terry and I were talking about earlier, we've factored in an adjustment for depreciation of around $20,000. This management goal of a transfer of 5% of local member dues, which equates to $32,000 this fiscal year. And then we've set aside just for capital outlay of $20,000. I think that this is far in excess of what we'll need, but we wanted to just be able to have it programmed into the budget kind of on a just in case situation. Those adjustments total $73,820, which reduces the forecasted net income for the year to just over $100,000. I want to be really careful in communicating that. I am not suggesting that we are actually going to have a net profit at the end of next fiscal year of $100,000. I think that for all the things that we discussed earlier, the uncertainty of the next couple of months I hope what this does is it gives you comfort that we have a cushion to be able to make decisions. I do not believe that we will finish next fiscal year in a deficit position, but we do have a couple of requests of you that we'd like you to consider to help us evaluate this year's budget a little bit differently than we normally do. So we've already talked about this, but I think the office space planning is priority for us. It's going to be really important as we enter into a new lease agreement to get this right. We know from a cost perspective, but also because we'll be entering into, I think, a longer term lease, and we want to make sure that we don't inadvertently hinder our kind of future financial ability. And despite the budget forecasting there, I would like to say that we're not requesting at this point in time authorization to fill any new positions. We would like to come back to you at a future time to be able to talk about that, but I think we would all agree that a little bit more certainty is needed before we would move to recruitment or filling any positions. So just to give you a little bit of information to ground you, I'm proposing that at least for the next 6 months, we maintain our current staff levels. That's 19 full-time personnel, 7 part-time personnel. That's actually not all paid positions. 2 are paid through the Wilder program at VCU. 2 are Bonner Scholars through University of Richmond. We do not pay those team members. They receive course credit, school credit for partnering with us. And then we do have 2 summer interns. And of course, that's a limited time during the year that those folks are on our rolls. We would want to return to you later in this fiscal year after definitely the first quarter closes to consider recruitment of new positions, and we would take those one by one. So I just want to sort of, I guess, forecast to you that we'd like to keep that discussion open, but at this point in time, we know that that's not a scenario that we should be pursuing right now. And so from a next step perspective, given the economic conditions and all the concerns that I think many of us have about what may be in the future, I think we'd like to take a similar approach as the jurisdictions to do a quarterly review. Terry and Diane have been working to upgrade our current bookkeeping system to QuickBooks Online, which has some increased functionality and features that I think is going to be really helpful to us. But we'd like the committee to work with us to review the budget on a quarterly basis, just as the localities will be, to come back and really figure out whether or not we need to make shifts throughout the year. Then additionally, Mrs. Page, when you asked the question about leave, I think we want to spend some time looking at our leave policies. Many of the jurisdictions have made the conversion from vacation and sick leave accrual to a paid time off model. And Terry has done some quick evaluations of that. We've looked at a couple of models. I think the town of Ashland has a really nice document that they put together that talks about that conversion. And that could help us sort of from a long-term sustainability perspective. And then, as I mentioned, the health insurance benefits for fiscal year 22 are on our to-do list to evaluate, just so that we can make sure that we've got a handle on those sort of escalating costs. So I'm not familiar with the language actually that the jurisdictions have taken as they've undertaken the budget review, but I think what we're looking for is a budget recommendation to the full commission on June 11th, with the recognition that we need to come back at October and again next January to evaluate this on a quarterly basis to make sure that we're tracking the way that we need and should be. And then Dr. Spagna also mentioned this already, but each of you have been so gracious to serve on this committee since it was formed, and our new chair will be making committee appointments. So if anybody is willing to stay on, obviously your continued service would be appreciated by us, but I can understand you have other commitments and responsibilities. So we'd love to get that information of who's willing to stay, if you think we need to ask anyone else to join the committee. And then as Dr. Spagna said, he will not be serving with us again after July, so we will need to have a new chair for the committee. So those are the two final bullets that I have to really talk about how we move forward to the June 11th meeting. And would be looking for your recommendations and a recommendation to the full commission.
This is Pat O'Ban, and I have a couple of things, if I can.
Sure.
Okay. I'd like
Please,
to know if Mr. Spagna, you won't be coming back, I'd like to nominate Jim Holland as chairman of this committee.
Well, let me say, I'm certainly happy to stay on. But if anyone wants to serve as chair, I'm most happy to allow them as well. So I'm certainly glad to serve. But certainly if anyone wants to, I'll be glad to work on the committee with you. I think one thing I can say about this committee has really done an excellent job. I think I remember Canova saying that we would have a downturn and get back, and he was absolutely right. We did the tough decision. I remember the vote, and we made the best decision at that time. So I applaud his thoughts and leadership at that point. And so, but thanks, Pat, for that. But I'll certainly do all I can to work with the committee and the work continue.
Well,
but thank you for that.
Your
Ms.
finance.
Canova Peterson, I agree. Jim Holland would be a perfect chairman.
The other thing, and I know this is a minor thing, but you have here under line 5020 restitution, Scott Newcomer. He's
Yes.
the man, the former treasurer that cooked the books and stole, I don't know, $300,000 or $400,000 at least. But you have zero. Has he completed his restitution? I know his son was paying.
We've just made it a habit not to budget for that repayment. It comes in. We have kind of learned that it is a little erratic in how regularly it comes in, and so we budget zero, and if it does come in, then we book it as revenue. I will follow up with Mr. Gregory again. We check with him periodically to see whether it's a good idea to force more formally and forcefully
how much more does he owe? Because he didn't serve any time, and I'm irritated by that, but
yeah,
he owes
Terry,
us to pay it back. So
I don't know that off the top of my head, Terry. I don't know if you want to. We can pull that and send it out to you guys.
His wife was making a lot of the restitution payments,
right.
And he passed. And Scott Newcomer is currently in Texas, and I believe he only paid about half back.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's just something I noticed that gets to me every time. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I can imagine.
On the budget, let me just comment. I appreciate your budgeting depreciation, which is the dollars that will be set aside, those are non-cash expenditures of your set aside for replacement of computers and other assets that the commission owns. So I applaud calculating that and showing that where you have it, other expenses, depreciation. So that's good to do going forward. And of course, we know it's non-cash, so that will not come out of the fund balance per se, but it can be money set aside to enhance the fund balance for replacement of future assets that the committee owns. So I think that's a really good thing to do. And certainly on a county-wise basis, we're doing the same thing, Martha, as you suggested. We're looking at the budget quarterly. We know we're gonna make adjustments going forward, but we have to have a budget initially. So we've approved our budget. We made some adjustments this past Wednesday in Chesterfield. And so what we're going to be doing is looking at it more closely, quarterly, and making sure we make adjustments as needed, because there will be some, no one really knows what's going to happen in a lot of areas, but what we do know is there will be some adjustments, hopefully not too material. But a quarterly basis sounds quite reasonable.
Other comments? Can we get a motion to recommend the draft budget to the full commission?
This is Jim Holland. I so move, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion.
I'll second.
Who was that?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, Ms. Fiscal, will you call the roll, please?
Was that Ms. Gray that seconded the motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Gray,
Aye.
thank you. Mr. Holland,
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon,
Aye.
Ms. Page,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Dr. Spagna.
Aye.
Thank you.
I
think that's all.
It is, yeah. The last item on the agenda was really around those procedural things of coming back. So we can get a little bit more specific with dates in the future, but I think for us, when we close the quarter, September 30th, that coming to this committee, in October, is Terry's been amazing at being able to close out the quarterly statements really quickly. But I think October would be a really useful time frame to look at how we're doing at the beginning of the quarter and make adjustments as necessary.
Martha, Canova Peterson, this has nothing to do with this committee, but I just wanted to remind you of our request at our last full commission meeting of to have a directory provided to all of the commissioners with contact information for staff and all commissioners and key staff.
Yeah, Diane, do we have that in the works?
Yes, it is in the works. It should be available.
Thank you.
Hopefully early next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay, well, if no one else has anything, that's all we've prepared for you. So sorry for going over a little bit, but I appreciate you guys working with us.
One last question, Terry. You have been working on some procedures and issues, internal control issues with my write-up. I just wonder how that was going and any new ideas we can come up with as we go forward, which I greatly appreciate.
Well, I did want to just add that another change that was made to the operating budget for fiscal year 21 was we took the capital expense line out of the budget.
Oh, yeah.
And we came down at the bottom of net income and we put in the capital outlay line.
Good.
Because that will allow me to capitalize the purchases in the correct month and then depreciate immediately.
Yeah.
Another idea or suggestion I would like to bring to this committee is that we consider getting away from looking at a monthly budget. Look at your budget in total. And it's looking at budgets by 1/12 each month and seeing where you're at year to date.
Right.
Because we have our payroll twice a month,
Right.
and our payroll doesn't always coincide with the number of project hours billed.
Correct. Yeah,
But it ebbs and flows.
sure.
Right.
Yeah, great idea. Now, also in terms of the bank reconciliation, who receives the bank rec, who reconciles it, who approves it, those kinds of procedures that hopefully be documented as we go forward. So we'll make sure we have good insight on internal controls.
Yeah, and we're
On
gonna
who's
need to
doing
update
what.
those. We need to update those anyway because SunTrust, our current bank, is changing their online process. So we're gonna actually be able to, especially while we're functioning like this, but even going forward, we're gonna be able to take advantage of some more features that they offer. So I'll be able to log in separately than Diane and Terry. So we can get back to you on that. They just sent that announcement out last week.
Good. Are they treating you well? Are you comfortable with it, with them? I know at the Richmond Region Tourism, we moved to Town Bank, who did some favorable things for us in terms of earning interest and that sort of thing. So
I think I would tell you too soon to tell with the merger with BB&T whether we're gonna.
Okay.
I think we've gotten good customer service. Terry and Diane have done a lot to get some of our fees reduced, but I would say we should look at banking.
I think we should shop. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, let's look at shopping and see what we can get and have a list of things that we want that we think will be helpful. And someone else.
I'd kind of rather shop while we're happy rather than shop when we're mad because
I couldn't agree more.
Make a bad decision. So yeah, I think that should be added to the list.
I agree. All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. I think we're taking more than enough of y'all's time today. I thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I would like to say one last. Go ahead. I just want to say one last thing before we close up here. Is George, we're going to miss you being on the committee and the commissions. It's I'm happy that you're going to be happy, but I just want to reinforce how much we are going to miss you.
Yeah, well, George,
yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Too, George, you may want to consider staying. Just be an ex-official or something. Just come back just to be with us.
Yesterday I was wearing my grandfather's shirt, and I'm hoping once the lockdowns are going away that I can spend a whole lot more time with my grandson.
I understand. That's more priority. That's higher priority. I agree. But I tell you, you're terribly missed here.
Well, it has been an honor to serve with you folks, and I want to thank you all for what you have done to help this committee move forward. We've come a long way in the last 2 years.
Yeah, thanks to you all. I appreciate it. Great job, y'all. Have a great weekend.
All of you.
Thank you all.
Martha, Terry, bye-bye.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay. Bye.